Hello, 5th grade math students. This is chapter 4.2, Real World Problems Multiplying with Proper Fractions. We're embarking upon our first sets of word problems for fractions in chapter 4. Let's get started. In our first problem, Maurice has 3/4 quart of chicken stock. He uses 2/3 of it to make some soup. How much chicken stock does he use to make the soup? And how much chicken stock does he have left? Let's begin by drawing a bar model to help us visualize the quantities. First, we'll begin with a bar that represents 1 quart. We know Maurice is starting with 3/4 of that quart. Correct? He's going to use 2/3 of that 3/4 to make some soup. And we'll represent that by drawing those 2/3 blue. I'm also going to write an X through here to show that we don't actually have that chicken stock. It's part of our full quart, but it's not part of our quantity that we're considering. So how much does Maurice use to make his soup? He uses 1/2 of a quart. See where I'm getting that number? The 2/3 of the 3/4 is represented right here. And that's 1/2 of the full quart of chicken stock. He has 1/4 of a quart left when he is done. Now let me show you method 2, where we can do this using mathematics instead of drawing a picture. So we are going to calculate 2/3 of 3/4. You'll remember that of is always code for multiply. So what we can do is find 2/3 of 3/4. And that will also tell us the amount of stock that Maurice used to make his soup. You can do this one of two ways. Again, recall from our last lesson, you can multiply across and then reduce. Or you can cross-reduce like this. And then multiply to get your final answer. Either way, you get an answer of 1/2. So Maurice uses 1/2 quart to make the soup. So how would we solve for B? What does he have left? We would take the 3/4 quart that we began with, and we'd subtract the 1/2 quart that he used to get 1/4 remaining. Just to show you, I skipped a step here. There you go. So he has 1/4 quart chicken stock left when he's done. Let's work through another problem like this together. Michelle has 4/5 gallon of paint. She uses 3/4 of her paint to paint a door. How much paint does she use? And how much paint is left when she's finished? Let's work through this problem using both method 1 and method 2. In method 1, we'll begin by drawing a picture. We'll use one bar model to represent a full gallon of paint. Michelle has 4/5 of a gallon. So I'm going to cross out this last box because it doesn't actually exist in our problem. It's just there to help us visualize what the full gallon looks like. So Michelle has this 4/5 gallon of paint. She uses 3/4 of that gallon to paint the door. So she's going to paint the door with 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4 of the paint. So our model shows us that there are 5 units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in our 1 gallon of paint. One of those units equals 1/5 of a gallon. And 3 of those units, which is what Michelle used to paint the door, equals 3/5 of a gallon. So Michelle used 3/5 gallon of paint to paint the door. The other way we could figure out that answer, if you didn't want to use this particular model here, is to simply count. There are 1, 2, 3 units that she used out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible units. So she used 3/5 gallons. And what is left over when she's done? She has this 1/5 of a gallon of paint remaining after she finishes her painting task. Let's try this again using method 2. In method 2, we'll solve our problem by setting up a multiplication problem. Remember, we're solving for 3/4 of 4/5. Of is code for multiplication. So we're going to set up a problem where 3/4 times 4/5 gives us the amount of paint used. I'm going to cross-reduce to get 3/1 times 1/5. Now I'm going to multiply across and get 3/5. Michelle used 3/5 of the gallon of paint. How much is left? Well, we'll solve for how much is remaining by taking our original amount, 4/5 gallon, and subtracting what she used, 3/5 gallon, to have 1/5 of a gallon left. So 1/5 remains of the 4/5 that she began with. Now we're going to work through a sample problem where we'll have an answer as a fractional remainder. Len received some money for a vacation job. He saved 1/4 of his money. He spent 4/9 of the remainder on a DVD. And then he spent the rest of the money on a t-shirt. So what fraction of his money was spent on the DVD? And what fraction of his money was spent on the t-shirt? There are 2 different methods that we can use to solve this problem. Let's walk through method 1 together. In method 1, we'll begin with a bar model. That bar model shows us Len's total amount of money. I'm going to divide it into fourths because the very first piece of information in the problem is that he saved 1/4 of the money. So this amount is saved. The next part of the problem tells us that Len spent 4/9 of the remainder on a DVD. So now what we need to do is take this remaining amount, the 3/4 of his money that's left, and we need to figure out how to show 4/9 being spent on the DVD. So let's divide what remains into 9 equal parts. It's not too difficult since there are 3 parts. We can just split each into 3 equal parts, giving us 9 total. However, I can't forget about this part because it's still part of our whole. So I'm rewriting this to be out of 12ths instead of out of 4ths. Okay, so what amount was spent on the DVD? 4 parts were spent on the DVD. 1, 2, 3, and 4 spent on the DVD. The rest was spent on a t-shirt. Our model is showing us that 3/12 were saved, 4/12 was spent on the DVD, and 5/12 was spent on the shirt. Now let's go back to the question to ensure we're answering with the proper bits of information. Len received some money for a vacation job. He saved 1/4 of the money, spent 4/9 of the remainder on a DVD, and spent the rest on a t-shirt? What fraction of his money was spent on the DVD? And what fraction of his money was spent on the t-shirt? Okay, so we know from looking at his money overall, when we've reworked this to be out of 12, his full amount was 12 twelfths, right? He spent 4 twelfths on the DVD. So the answer to A is 4 twelfths. But we need to simplify. We always want to show things in simplest form. He spent 1/3 of his money on a DVD. The second question was, how much of his money did he spend on the t-shirt? Well, he spent 5 twelfths on the t-shirt. Okay? So there's method 1 using the bar models. Now let's solve this same problem using method 2. All right, let me read you this problem one more time just to refresh in your mind what we're looking for. Len earned some money for a vacation job. He saved 1/4 of the money. Let's write our information down. He saved 1/4. He spent 4/9 of the remainder on a DVD, and the rest on a t-shirt. Part A asks what fraction was spent on the DVD. And part B asks what fraction was spent on the shirt. All right, let's solve this using the mathematical method, method 2, instead of the picture method, method 1. So to begin solving this problem, we start with Len's total amount of money, which is represented by 1. 1 is his full quantity of cash. We know that he's saving 1/4, so we need to subtract away 1/4. This will give us the amount of money that's left after he saves his 1/4. So what's left? 3/4. 3/4 of his money is left. Now we know that he spent 4/9 of the remainder on his DVD. So 4/9 of, code for multiply, 3/4 was spent on the DVD. We can cross-reduce to make this problem a little bit easier. So those 4's can each be divided by 4. Looking at this numerator and denominator pair, each can be divided by 3. So now I can rewrite this fraction as 1/3 times 1/1, giving me 1/3. Len spent 1/3 of his money on the DVD. Question B was, what fraction of his money was spent on the t-shirt? Well, he had 3/4 of his money remaining. He then spent 1/3 of his money on the DVD. So we're going to subtract this to find out how much money was spent on the t-shirt. So the first thing we need to do is get a common denominator, which will be 12. 3/4 becomes 9/12. 1/3 becomes 4/12, and we get an answer of 5/12. Len spent 5/12 of his money on the t-shirt. So there are 2 ways to think about that problem. You can use the picture if it helps you to visualize it, or you can go straight to the numbers and use the numerical or mathematical process if that works better for your brain. Let's try another problem like this. Since it's fairly complex, I'd like to work through one more example with you before I set you off on your own. Janice picks some strawberries. She uses 3/5 of the strawberries to make some jam. She then gives 3/4 of the remainder to her neighbor. What fraction of the strawberries does she give to her neighbor? And what fraction of the strawberries does she have left for her own use? Let's begin with method 1, the bar model method. Janice begins with a whole quantity of strawberries that we'll represent with 1 bar. She's going to use 3/5 to make jam, so let's divide this into 5 parts. 3/5 will be used for jam. 2/5 will be the remainder. Janice is going to give 3/4 of the remainder to her neighbor. However, in the remainder right now, there are only 2 equal parts. So I need to divide that to have 4 parts. So I can simply divide those in half. Don't forget though, I have to do the same to the jam portions. All I'm doing when I divide these sections is I'm making equivalent fractions. See, before this would have been 3/5 and this would have been 2/5. But now, because I needed to divide this into 4 parts, I needed this to equal 4. This has to become 10. So this has to become 6/10. We needed to have 10 parts total in order for the equivalent fractions to work. That's why you also have to divide the other squares. All right, back to the problem. Janice gave 3/4 of the remainder to her neighbor. So she gave her neighbor 1, 2, 3 of those 4 remaining units of berries. Referring back to our question, part A asked us, what fraction of the strawberries does Janice give to her neighbor? Well, we can answer that now. Janice gave 3 of 10 equal parts to her neighbor. So her neighbor received 3/10 of the strawberries. What fraction of the strawberries did Janice have left? Well, she had 1/10 left. Because remember, all of this was used to make jam. So she only has this one little section left to eat. Okay, so she has 1/10 of her strawberries left for her own use. Now let's try this again using method 2. In method 2, we're not going to use the visual bar model. We're going to go straight to the math. We know that Janice starts with 1 whole quantity of strawberries. She's then going to use 3/5 of that to make jam, leaving 2/5 as her remainder. After making the jam, Janice gives 3/4 of the remainder, or the 2/5, to her neighbor. 3/4 of 2/5. We can cross reduce here, but not here. So our new fractions are 3/2 times 1/5, or 3/10. So Janice gives 3/10 to her neighbor. How do we calculate what she has left? Which is question B. We're going to start with her remainder, 2/5, and we're going to subtract what she gave to her neighbor, 3/10. We need an equivalent fraction here, so this will become 4/10 minus 3/10, giving us 1/10 as an answer. So Janice has 1/10 of the strawberries left when she is done making jam and kindly sharing berries with her neighbor. And that finishes up chapter 4.2. I bet you're wondering, just like Mr. Giraffe, where's the practice? The answer is there aren't any in this video. We're going to work through problems together tomorrow when I see you. From the textbook. This is fairly complex, and I find that it's a little bit better if I simply help you through the process as you're first learning how to do it. So I'll see you tomorrow. We'll work on some practice problems together. Thanks for your hard work and attention tonight, and have a good evening.